All right, good afternoon, everybody, or I should say good morning. We're not quite to the noon hour. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. For those of you that have joined us in the past, you'll know the procedure pretty much. We always do like to briefly go over how these webinars will function. And Zoom is still relatively new to us and probably to many of you out in the field. So while we wait for folks to get logged in here, I'm going to go over some of the basic procedures. Throughout the course of the webinar today, we will be accepting your questions and comments. Please utilize the Q&A option that you'll find in the upper left part of your screen. And it's just a little button that you can click. And I ask you to click that now and to do a quick test. Just send us a yes or a Y or I can hear you, anything to that effect in that Q&A box, and kick that on back to us. And that lets us know our signal's getting out and that you folks have found a Q&A button that you will be using throughout the course of the webinar today. You should also have the first page of our PowerPoint presentation viewable on your screen. Should you not see that, have any audio problems, or encounter other technical problems in the course of this webinar, again, you can use this Q&A box, flip us a note. I'll be monitoring that in the background. We'll attempt to take care of anything that may pop up of a technical nature, but I think looks like we're good to go there. I certainly appreciate the feedback on the audio test. So my part is done. I'm going to step aside and we'll begin this webinar in just a moment.
Thank you for joining us for the September GATE Equity webinar, where we explore topics related to equity and graduation success. This webinar will be recorded, and we're working on our process for making our webinars ADA compliant, so stay tuned for those recordings. The PowerPoint is posted right now on the OSPI GATE Equity webinar page, so if you want to follow along in the PowerPoint or if you want a copy of it, that's where it is. Also, we'd like to ask that you direct the questions you want us to answer to the Q&A function, not the chat, so we can more easily monitor and respond to you. Chat's more for your own commentary, so if you want to say something like, yay, yippee, that's the place to do it, okay? I'm Kathy Anderson. I'm an OSPI graduation and equity program manager now. Yay, exciting. Today's topic is implications of attendance and what you can do. September is Attendance Awareness Month, and as many of you know, Washington has one of the highest rates of chronic absenteeism in the nation. We want to offer you some practical advice, and you get bonus goodies too. I'm joined today by Krissy Johnson, OSPI Assistant Program Supervisor, and James Wise, Sunnyside High School's Assistant Principal. We're glad y'all could be here today to share your expertise with us. Here at OSPI, all of our work is grounded in the vision for every student to graduate from high school ready for career, college, and life. The mission of OSPI is to provide resources to schools and districts to ensure that students are successful. In 2014, OSPI adopted agency-wide measures of success and implemented research-based performance indicators, including avoiding chronic absenteeism. These serve to guide our work across the K-12 public education system. So, today's goals, we're going to be looking at the broad picture of Washington's attendance. We're also going to hear from James about what's happening at Sunnyside with attendance, and we're going to have some OSPI attendance awareness tools. We will have a very brief section of the updated legislative and WAC changes, and Krissy is going to go more into that.
Thanks.
I'm going to pass it to Krissy.
Thanks, Kathy, and thank you everyone for being here today. We're really excited to have James with us, and in order to give him the right amount of time to hear about their great work at Sunnyside High, the WAC and legislative changes will be just a brief update. So I know there have been a lot of changes lately. There's rulemaking and public comment period right now. Just want to let you know that that is not the primary focus of this webinar. But please follow up with us if you do have comments about that, and let us know if there is a need for further webinars on those topics. You want to do this one?
Oh, sure. Well, for overall at OSPI, we're looking at graduation as our goal. And chronic absenteeism, 9th grade course failure, and discipline all play into student success overall for graduation. So we're focusing in today on chronic absenteeism to get a little more serious about how that contributes to our students and how they're doing.
So we'll start off with a brief overview of the data. Our state data show that in 2016, we had over 194,000 students that were chronically absent. That's 16% of our student body. This is a huge equity issue. We see that 1 in 5 low-income students are chronically absent, and 1 in 3 Native American students and Pacific Islander students are chronically absent. And just to get us grounded here, what we're talking about when we say chronically absent, we are through our CEDARS data collection. OSPI is looking at students that are absent for a full day, which is 50% or more of their day, for any reason, excused, unexcused, and for suspensions. We're not talking only about truancy. Truancy is a subset of students that are chronically absent, and truancy in our state, as you know, is missing 5 or more full days that are unexcused in a month, or missing 10 or more full days unexcused in a year. All right, we'd like to start off with a poll just to get a sense of who is attending this webinar.
That's right. And our poll today, we have, what role do you play in attendance? Are you a counselor, educator, administrator, parent or caregiver, community member, professional association, or someone else? And while we do that, do you guys have any burning questions that you have for Krissy about data or what's going on? You can put those into the Q&A section for us as well. And it looks like we've got a lot of administrators on today. That's 37%. So here, share results. Take a look at that. All right, thanks for answering our polling question. We're gonna keep going.
Okay, I am very pleased to be able to introduce you to James Wise, who's the assistant principal at Sunnyside High School. He's here to share his journey and Sunnyside's journey with attendance. So I'm going to turn it over to you, James, and if you could just start off by introducing yourself and a little bit about Sunnyside High.
Sounds great. So James Wise, I've been at Sunnyside High School for 17 years. Sunnyside High School is on the east southern side of the state, and our high school right now is around 2,000 students. And we have 90% free and reduced lunch and about 85% Hispanic population. I have been an administrator for 3 years now and was given the job specifically to focus on attendance.
Great. Thanks, James. Why don't you start us off, if you would, by talking about why attendance is a focus at Sunnyside High and how you knew it was something that you all needed to work on.
Okay, so the first bullet there, as you can see, it's probably a no-brainer for most people. Of course, the goal is that all students will be successful and that we want them to graduate college and career ready. Sunnyside High School, some of you may know the story. We were deemed a failing school about 8 or 10 years ago, somewhere around there. The state came in and said that we weren't doing a good job, and we had to agree because our graduation rate was less than 50%. It was a pretty abysmal graduation rate. So we went through a lot of changes, and this last school year we had a graduation rate of 90.1%, which we're really proud of, and we've worked hard to get there. The thing is, of course, all students means 100%. So we continually try to refine our systems, and we looked at the 10% that didn't graduate, which in our case was 46 students that did not graduate. And what we found is, as we analyzed each reason those kids didn't graduate, that 44 out of the 46 did not graduate primarily due to poor attendance. We know that there's a lot of factors that are barriers to graduation and to poor attendance, and we have a lot of interventions to try to tackle those, but those interventions can't work when the student's not at school. So of course we said we need to figure out the attendance thing, because If attendance wasn't a factor, we would have had 99.5% graduation rate. So attendance, some people treat as though it's not that big a deal. I just missed a day here, or I'm tardy at, a couple minutes here. But really it does add up, and it does have a significant impact on the future of these kids, but also our measure of graduation.
Excellent, thanks. So now I'd like to ask you to just kind of take us through your journey. How did you begin this work, and what did that first year look like for you?
Well, I mentioned that I was given this job as an assistant principal, my first assistant principal job. So the first year, I was trying to figure out how to be an administrator, but I was also, as far as attendance, I started by looking at what are the laws, trying to understand the laws around attendance, looking at the data at our building, what was going on, how bad was it, so to speak, looking at the existing systems in my building and trying to figure out were there enough of them, were they functioning, what's the current state of things. And that's why we put the first bullet, current reality. I had to understand where we were at. And I mentioned that I was trying to also find my footing sort of as an administrator. And so I spent a lot of time doing things that I thought would be helpful. And as I got into my second year, I looked back and realized that a lot of it was just trying to stay above the waterline, trying to not sink as a first year administrator, and also trying to make an impact, but not quite understanding all the factors involved in attendance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really how I started the work. But I wanted to, of course, improve. So something happened towards the end of my first year. My building principal kept seeing a particular student. I'll call him Angel. We kept seeing Angel before school. We kept seeing Angel during lunch, kept seeing him after school. But his attendance was horrible as far as being in class, and his grades were really bad. And the principal asked me about him, and unfortunately my response was, I don't know who you're talking about. And I was asked about him a week later, and I still hadn't figured out who he was talking about and what I should be doing with him. And that really made an impact on me. I wanted by the end of my first year I felt that one of my responsibilities was to figure out all the kids who had issues related to attendance. I needed a system where I could identify every single one, and no student would fall through the cracks as far as my awareness of their need. And so that's where I ended year one, and year two was really about creating a system that would allow me to catch every student. So thanks for going to the next slide there. The first box is really showing there's a wide spectrum of students with attendance issues. Yeah, some are, perfect attendance. We just gave a scholarship last year to a student who had 4 years of perfect attendance at the high school. But then down at the bottom, you have the student that you keep having to drop, from the roster, or from the unenroll them based on poor attendance once or twice, and then they disappear for a long time. So you have this wide spectrum. I already stated my first goal was to figure out how can I make sure that I don't lose a kid. I don't want to have Angel occur again. I want to know every student. And so that's where I started in making improvements for year two. So I became aware of where every student was, but then I realized that the systems that I had, there were gaps. There were students with attendance issues related to, say, health issues, or attendance issues related to drug and alcohol issues, or to academic issues. But there were attendance issues, and my systems weren't addressing the underlying issue behind that. So that's where I started year two, figuring out I need to improve my interventions. If you could go back to the last slide for just a moment. So the current reality was figuring out where I was at. The new ideal is saying, okay, I'm starting to understand where my deficiencies are. But I think one of the biggest parts, true to Sunnyside High School, is that I adopted the philosophy that we share here, that the leadership's willing to be held accountable. And what we mean by that is, my first year as administrator, I did have thoughts sometimes of if only the family would do this, or if only the student did this, or if only the teachers were able to help out with this. And I think that's the wrong way to approach the work. The right way to approach the work is to say, what can I do as a leader to support all those that I'm working with, to be more successful in their area? And sometimes that's challenging. You know, when you ask yourself, what can I do to help parents? They each have their unique situations, and so that's tough to figure that out. But that's a really important bullet, is that the leadership's willing to say, okay, this is something that I need to make sure that I take care of. And it doesn't mean I do everything. It means that I consider the needs of all those that I'm serving. Go ahead and go forward to the next slide. I think we put this in to really talk about how could a school approach attendance. Is that correct, Krissy?
Yes. You had wanted to talk about your process in building a team and setting standards.
Yeah, so this last AWSP conference, I was part of a presentation on what we were doing at Sunnyside, and I presented some of the things that I'm doing around attendance. I had a lot of questions about how do you get started? What do you do? What are your interventions? Things like that. And so I've put a lot of thought to that, and there's essentially 4 things I would recommend. And not everybody's going to be on step 1 of my 4 things. It's essentially you're going to be in your whatever place you are in your process of tackling attendance. But these are the things that I would recommend. The first one is to identify the standard that you want to have at your building for attendance. There's laws, of course, around what's acceptable attendance, what's not acceptable. And of course, we just mentioned a few minutes ago the definition of chronically absent and some of the definitions around truancy. But I actually mean going beyond that. At your school, what are you going to deem as attendance that has reached the point of that's too many absences? So I think that's where you need to start. And at Sunnyside High School, we decided 10. When I say we decided, I mean that I talked to my administrative team and I talked to teachers. And then I wouldn't say we voted on it, but we had lengthy conversations and we decided that 10 was the magic number. And we made it essentially a motto that we shared with students and with community, that 10 is too many. Now, what does 10 is too many mean? It means that we don't want you to get there. It doesn't mean that you automatically lose credit or you automatically get referred to truancy court. It just means that that's going to be our standard. We don't want it to reach that number. So I had staff that were interested in setting the mark at 8 and some at 12 and some at 15 and some who said, it really, the number doesn't matter. It's how they're performing in class. And so, of course, different people have different philosophies. But I think it's important for the building to say, this is our standard, and then communicate it, sort of this one vision, one voice to the students in the community. So once you pick that standard, the next thing, number 2, I suppose.
Before you move on, can I ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
So 10 is too many. So was that full day absences or?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I haven't brought this up yet, but being a high school, we have looked at the definition of being absent and recognized that if absences are counted in days, then a student who attends all but one of his classes every day is doing fine, according to the definition of chronically absent. The challenge with that is when you're absent to one period of class at school, you've been absent for that class, for that day. And so in a sense, one day from one period is a day in that period. If I was the construction teacher, you were gone that whole day for me because you had me just that one period and I didn't see you. So you were gone for a day. And so we decided that for Sunnyside High School, 10 is too many was specific to periods of absence, not days. That was a big deal for all of us because when we talk about all students being successful, if a student's gone just one of the periods of the day, that's still not guaranteeing their success. They need to be all their classes every day. So all the data, everything I'm going to talk about, and I have talked about, it's all goes back to we don't want students to miss more than 10 periods of absence, and we track everything based on that philosophy of periods.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So going back, so step 2, if we've decided that 10 is too many for us, then what we did next was say, what are we going to do so they don't get to 10? At 10, this should, I'm sorry, if we don't want them to get to 10, at 2, this should happen. At 4 absences, this should happen. At 6, this should happen, and so on. And I think that's a good discussion to have at each building. Once you've set your standard and you've said 10 is too many, then what is it you're going to do to prevent it from getting to 10? And those are going to be your steps. And we have some that we've selected at our school, and you'll have some that you already have in place and some that you'll select. And I'll talk about some of those strategies a little bit later. So once you've selected those steps, I think the next best thing is to identify what's the end size? What are you looking at? If you say that at 6 absences, you're going to have an attendance contract with a parent meeting, if you're going to set that as your intervention, is that even possible? Right now, we struggle as a state with chronic absenteeism as defined by days. Well, imagine what happened over at Sunnyside High School when we started looking at periods. The number of students who popped up on our list of needing an attendance contract for that particular class, the number was really high. As an example, I'll tell you, we have a school of about 2,000, like I said earlier. And yesterday we had 416 who missed at least one period of absences. So that's a large number of students who missed at least one period. And if today's, I think, the 17th day of school for us. And so we already have, I think, 71 students who've missed at least 8 days in one class. And so all those students have already hit our mark for attendance contracts. That's a lot of attendance contracts. I don't have the capacity to have every single one of those meetings. And so we did what I've already advocated for, and that is to have a conversation with your leadership, with your staff, and decide together what are we going to do? What's our game plan? And what we decided is that we would cut down on who we were focusing on. 10 is too many, but we also have to be realistic in what we can achieve. And so we took the student list, and we said, in conversations with teachers, it was decided that if the students' absences were parent excused, then we would allow them to be dropped off the list. We wouldn't focus on them for the attendance contract meeting. And then we took a look at that end size, and honestly, it was still beyond our capacity at the time. And so we had to reevaluate, and we decided if a student's passing all their classes, we're not really okay with them being absent, but somehow they're still figuring out how to be successful in the classroom, even with those absences. And so we took students off the list if they were passing all their classes. So then our list became manageable. We got to the point where we work with all of those students. And so
can I ask, just to clarify, so you eliminated students that had both parent excused absences and were not failing, correct? Not one or the other?
It actually is one or the other.
Okay.
I guess I left out one piece there. Our goal at the very beginning and currently is to make sure that all absences get decreased, and that all students, regardless of their performance in the class, that they're getting the attention they need to improve their attention or their attendance. And so the measures we took were really just measures to allow us to be able to manage the work that was in front of us. But it is our goal, and it continues to be, to broaden that list of students we're working with to match capacity. And this year we were, through a few of the things that we've put in place, we've been able to double our capacity this year. And we're adding a number of students onto the list that aren't failing classes. And we continue to have meetings with students who have large number of parent excused absences. So we have so essentially a benchmark number that we have identified, that if your parent excused this many times, then that's too many, and we need to meet with you as well. And so that's essentially step 4, I think, in how to build a system, is to continue to improve your system and figure out how to increase its capacity and its effectiveness. So
can I ask you to mention how your teachers are involved in the different steps or the different points, the different absences?
Absolutely. And actually, maybe we can go 2 slides forward on this one. So one of the very first things that I had to tackle when I first became in charge of attendance was the culture of attendance. Prior to my hiring, there was one administrator in charge of attendance and discipline. And that can be quite a lot to manage. And when you're getting sent a lot of students with discipline problems to your office, it's tough to put a really strong focus on attendance. And so the culture of attendance hadn't necessarily been tended for a while. And even, actually I shouldn't say that it was tended some, but the effectiveness hadn't quite reached what we needed it to be. And so I needed to go around and I needed to see what are the attitudes out there. And there was a lot of frustration on the part of staff. There was a lot of ambivalence on the part of students, and in some cases parents. And in general, attendance wasn't looked at as a big issue to have to pay attention to or to have to address. And so the very first thing that we needed to do was work with staff on identifying why the culture was where it was and what we wanted to do about it. I've already mentioned that it's important for leadership to be held accountable. What they're really held accountable to is figuring out how within the building, with everything that we have, staff, students, facilities, all our resources, how do we effectively combat this issue? And so in talking to staff, it was immediately evident that they did care about attendance, but they felt that there wasn't very much they could do about it. And so the way we worked on it is through a cyclical process of saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Here's some data here. Here's an intervention that we'd like to try. What do you think? Let's try it. And I guess I feel like I'm being a little vague. I'll give you an example. We've had a lunchtime detention for tardies for several years, and it has only been marginally effective. And so last year in the spring, I talked to probably about 40 staff members and identified some suggestions that they had. We put them in place this year and immediately realized there were some big hiccups. So I talked to those staff again and other staff and students and my admin team, and we continue to make improvements to it until I believe this week it's finally reached its initial effectiveness. And I say initial because we're going to continue talking to staff and continue figuring out how to attack that particular problem. And so staff are the ones talking to students. Staff are the ones seen how the attendance is impacting the students' academic performance, and they're a really strong asset in attacking attendance. But it needs, in order to utilize them properly, there needs to be a lot of working with them to identify the most effective way to set up your system.
Excellent. I'd like to take a second to ask you, in those first couple of years as you were meeting with students, what were some of the themes that you saw for why students were absent in your school?
Absolutely. So, yes, thank you. That's what I was going to say. So there's a lot impacting student absenteeism, and anyone listening, anyone who's worked with attendance knows that there's a lot of issues the students are dealing with that are causing them to believe that their attendance isn't something they should put a priority on. As the first bullet states, engagement's at the root of all absenteeism. And I want to qualify that a little bit, but I'll talk about it first. Engagement really means being involved. And when a student is absent, that's a strong signal that they don't value being involved. And the second bullet says health factors. I'll use that as an example. I do have, as I work with students and families, there are a lot of students dealing with health issues. They have to go to the doctor frequently, or they need to go to the restroom frequently. They need to do all sorts of things that get in the way of attending classes. But what I've also noticed is students with health issues, when they want to be somewhere, when they want to attend the assembly, or when they are having a activity that they really enjoy in a specific classroom, they make sure to be there. And sometimes that means altering their appointments, altering their habits. They make sure to be there. And so even health factors can be really evident of their level of engagement, how much they value being at school. On the side there, you'll see the conceptual framework. This is essentially how Sunnyside High School approaches the work. And when I say the work, I really mean all the work that goes on in this building is centered on making sure that we provide a setting built on relational trust. We want students to feel safe. We want them to know that we have something to offer. We want them to know that we're willing to provide time and expertise. When students skip class, for example, and they say, well, I just don't know what's going on, that's a symptom of not recognizing that that we're willing to provide time and expertise. When a student skips class and says, I just don't get along with the teacher, or a student's absent and they say, you know what, I'm not going to graduate. There's no reason for me to go to school. I think that's the symptom that they don't recognize that we have something to offer to them, or they don't believe that they can reach it themselves. And so, again, it comes back to they're not engaging for some reason. And when we go to try to understand how do I help this situation, help them with their attendance, it's part of it is identifying these themes. I have a third bullet there, family issues. Family issues are really challenging to tackle because nobody wants to go in and tell a family you need to change how you're parenting, or you need to, move out of that house and get into a better situation, or you need to stop drinking so much, or whatever the situation might be. Family issues are very challenging. But when I sit down to attendance contract meeting, my first few years, I listened to all the stories of what's going on in their lives, and I still do now. But what I didn't realize back then, I should say back then, I thought that one of the things I needed to do was try to help them solve their problems. What I recognize now is I just need to help them focus on the right things, and that will help them find the solution to their problems. And the right thing is that they all want to graduate. Every single student that I've talked to wants to graduate college and career ready. I have had a few who tell me, no, I don't care, it doesn't matter. But deep down, I've never had a case where it turned out that way. There was always a hidden reason for them making that statement. But 95% of the time, they will readily state that they want to graduate. And so then the conversation at an attendance contract meeting is really about, despite your health issues, despite your family problems, if you want to graduate, what can we do? And one of the benefits of focusing only on students who are failing classes is that the attendance contract meeting can start by talking about, you're failing this class, and that is creating a barrier to you graduating. So what's causing this failure? And as you have that conversation, invariably attendance can be brought up and can take center stage for a moment, and goals and interventions can be created and found to help with the attendance. Anyway, there's many other themes related to attendance, but they all come back to identifying or setting it straight with the student and family that, yes, they do want to graduate, and despite what's the barrier, let's find a solution together.
Excellent. I'd love to hear you talk about some of the interventions. If you have anything else to say about that, maybe more about your re-engagement strategies.
Absolutely. So I listed under re-engagement strategies, build relationships, connect to school, and envision their future. Those are three key aspects of re-engaging students, or engaging them to begin with. Those are what I look to when I try to decide if my intervention is achieving its goals as far as getting the kid to want to come to school more. Of course, I care about academics and so on, but if I can get the intervention to contain one of those or more of those attributes, then I know it can be a successful system. So to elaborate a little bit more, as an example, we still have at our school, we have after-school detention, we have in-house, we have suspensions, and if a student is caught skipping, they do get an after-school detention. But we have found, for example, a strategy that I'm sure many other schools use, and that is, if a kid is skipping, we try to find out why, and find out why are they not engaging in the class that they're skipping. And in most cases, this student is failing. In many cases, the student doesn't believe that being there is going to remedy the failing grade. And so after-school detention doesn't seem like a strategy that would actually result in the student feeling more like going to that class, or feeling more hopeful that attending will actually result in academic improvement. And so we still use after-school detention in some cases, and I'll explain in just a moment. But the strategy we prefer is now, when we have a student skipping, if it's an academic reason, then we say, how about instead of the after-school detention, you go after school to this teacher's class or this teacher's class. And in that class, you can make up the time that you would have for your after-school detention, and your teacher will help you with the support that you need for your grades. And so that's a way that we've reinvented a common strategy to deal with skipping, the after-school detention. And in the process, we hope that they're building relationships with the teacher where they've had the challenges, and we hope they're also connecting to the school and seeing that the school is providing a support that they needed. And then, of course, envisioning a future of being successful in that class and not having to skip in order to feel better about that situation. I was going to highlight a couple other strategies, but I don't know if that one was clear. I didn't know if you had a question about that, Krissy.
No, that was clear for students that are struggling academically and skipping. And what about students where that doesn't seem to be the problem, but
yeah, so let me tell you some of the other strategies, but I wanted to highlight that one just to say, here's an example of how we've modified a pretty standard intervention.
Absolutely.
instead of going through every single one of the interventions that we use, I'll just mention a few. The attendance contract meeting is one that's very common. And some of the things that we do in that meeting is we automatically ask parents if it's okay. We get the consent to give the student the WARNs. The WARNs, if you haven't heard of it, you should look it up. It's the Washington Assessment of Risk and Needs Survey. And we have found that to be very helpful in helping surface some of the root causes of the disengagement with the school and the absenteeism that's been a result of that. And so in our attendance contract meetings, we always have the WARNs consent there. We have a new intervention we're starting this year, so it's we're still modifying it. But when we saw students going to truancy course, sometimes the judge assigned community service, and so that made us think, why aren't we doing that? And so we now offer service time to students. And when I say offer, I sort of mean assign. We assign them service time. But we don't do community service right off the bat. We start with academic service, and we tell them that they are serving themselves first. They're assigned time that they have to go and get academic support from teachers in the content area where they're failing. And then we've worked with the staff, the teachers, so that they work with us to account for the student having completed that. So service time. And then if the student's disengaging in other ways, we have school service time, and the student is involved with or matched up with a club where they could go and provide some service in some way to the school. And then community service, of course, where there are service opportunities within our community. And some of those we're creating ourselves just so that we have a venue where these students can serve the community. So our attendance contract or a contract meeting is sort of the most important place where we initiate our strongest interventions. And the reason we've made it there is because that's when the parent is there. And we need the parent to engage in the school as well. And so we try to make it very clear that this isn't us being upset with the student. This is us trying to help the student and the family identify what needs to happen in order for your student to graduate. What needs to happen now in the next 2 weeks, in the next month, in order to put them back on track. And so that's one intervention right there. You'll notice the picture has kids eating donuts. We also, in part of changing the culture of attendance, started providing more incentives. And donuts are probably our most popular incentive. One of the issues around attendance is that students who have poor attendance tend to isolate themselves. And so we came up with the idea of giving out donuts to whole classes who have perfect attendance on any given day. The way it works for us is I walk into a classroom on a random day of the week, and I just ask the class, is everybody on time? And then is everybody present? And if the entire class is on time and everybody's there, then the entire class gets donuts. And what it's allowed me to do is it's allowed me to help students celebrate together, but when not everybody's there, have a conversation together about why do students miss school and what can we together do about attendance. And so that's been instrumental. Actually, I'll say I don't think there's been anything more impactful on the culture of attendance at Sunnyside High School than donut days. And it may seem weird, but half the students probably don't even know my name. They just know me as the donut guy. And when I walk around the school, they're asking me where the donuts are. And it's really easy for me to say, when your class has perfect attendance, give me a call. And if I have donuts, I'll come give them to you. Nice. But I went this week, donut day was on Tuesday. And so we went and we visited about 13 classrooms before we ran out of donuts. And only 3 classrooms received donuts. I only take, I think, 6 dozen. But in the classrooms where we don't give away donuts, we still find a way to reward them. And the way we've done that this year is we've invited community members to accompany us on our donut day rounds. And they give typically a 30-second message on attendance. And we don't tell them what to say, but they say some really spectacular things to the students about the importance of good attendance. And they typically also will bring some prizes, and we give those to the students in the room who individually have perfect attendance. But I like that intervention because it really did change the culture of attendance. Students talk about attendance a lot now. Students are aware of their attendance, and students understand why attendance matters, because I always talk to them about why it matters. That's really the key message to them.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I have one last question for you, since we're nearing the end of our time here, and then we'll take a look at what the audience has in terms of questions. I just wanted to ask you, this is a couple years in, how do you persist in this work given the challenges in student attendance?
That's a great question. If you could go 2 slides ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I did have another question. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's so. What the question that's on the slide, what advice would you give to people starting this work? Essentially, what I had to ask myself, how am I going to do this? And then as the numbers increased, I gave you that number just a moment ago that 400 and I think I said 16 students were absent for one period yesterday. That's pretty astronomical. When I tell students that on a donut day, their jaws drop too. And I tell them, I'm the person in charge of attendance, but I can't talk to all 416 students who were gone yesterday. I need your help. And that's how I think these things should be tackled. That's how I feel comfortable, I guess, at the end of the day, feeling that I'm doing okay, because I don't put it completely on my shoulders. Now, I do put the responsibility as the leader of attendance, I do put the responsibility to have a functioning system. But within that system, I'm not the only one talking to 416 kids. We're doing it together. The second bullet there says, together we will reach our new ideal. That's the Sunnyside High School model this year. Every year since we worked on improving our graduation rate when the state deemed us as unsuccessful, we have had together we will as part of our motto. And we have added to it. And this year it's reach our new ideal. I probably did an okay job 2 years ago in attendance. I did a much better job last year. And I knew every kid last year who needed an intervention. But there were many kids that I couldn't get to just because of capacity. And this year I feel better because I know who they are and I'm getting to them, not always immediately. But that's how I guess that's how I feel that or how I measure whether I'm being successful is, are the students who need the help getting the help? And then as time goes on, working in this outside-in model, which is really creating structures with the support of staff and students, and then revisiting those structures to make sure they're having the effectiveness that they have. That's how I make sure that the model's continually improving. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but I think that's my response.
Excellent. Thanks. And I think we have 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Yeah, we do. Janice was wondering, students eligible for special education typically have an extremely high rate of absences and low graduation rates. How does the system address these students? In particular, if this is an issue at Sunnyside High School, are there any different or additional interventions or strategies that you use for those special education students?
We do. We last year at the beginning of the year, we actually did some of what I've been advocating, and that is we decided to have a little panel, and we pulled together about 10 of our worst attending and academically deficient SPED students, put them all in a room, and said, okay, here's what we're seeing. We're seeing an attendance problem. We're seeing some academic challenges. We've also seen some behavior issues. Here's what we've thought we could do about it, and what do you think? And of course, we didn't let them decide, and we didn't specifically just say, you guys pick. That wasn't the idea. The idea is that when you listen carefully, as a leader going and trying to figure out how to solve the problem, when you listen carefully to what's being said, you'll pick up on the causes, the root causes, the root philosophies of those that you're trying to support. And we were able to pick out of that the students wanted to have more frequent feedback on their attendance. Now, of course, SPED students who have bad attendance didn't say it that way. But they did say that they wanted somebody to check in on them. And so we found a way to have a para freed up from some other work that the para had done. And there's a para now that checks in on a regular basis with students that are SPED, and checks in about grades, about attendance, and as necessary about behavior as well. But that idea came from going and talking to the students. And again, I don't want to make it sound as though we asked the students and just did but we went and tried to listen deeply to what is it that they think would solve their problem. Because often I think leaders try to identify what they think that will solve the problem without doing an adequate job of checking in with all the stakeholders and identifying some great ideas that they have. So I advocate for that quite a bit.
That's great advice. I think we have one more question.
Yes, Greg was actually wondering, is it possible for you to just restate those 4 recommendations one more time for him?
Yes, absolutely. So first is to identify your standard, and Sunnyside High School standard is 10 is too many. And so you need to decide for yourself, what is our building going to say is too many absences? And the reason to identify that is so that then you can backtrack and say, okay, if 10 is too many for us, then I need to do something, and this is what I'll do, so that by the time they get to 10, or actually to say it differently, so that we can try and stop them from ever getting to 10. So that's the first thing, identify the standards. Second, identify the steps, interventions that you're going to utilize to try to prevent them from ever getting to 10. And I think I had 3 interventions my first year. We increased that to 5 interventions my second year, and now we've added 2 more, so we're at 7 interventions. We don't use them all with every kid, but you can see how we're identifying slowly additional things that we can do to help students. So number 2, identify those steps. Number 3, look at the data. Determine who your focus group is. I talked to you about how the capacity is simply not there yet at our building to talk to every single student who's at risk of being chronically absent. And so we've whittled it down to students who have unexcused absences and are failing classes. That's who we work with. And I should add, I think I said this earlier, but I should add that we definitely work with anybody else. If parents come in and want us to talk to their student, or are worried about their student, or if the counseling a counselor brings up a student, we work with them as well. But our targeted group is failing kids and unexcused absences. And then finally step 4 is create a system or a cycle of working with the staff and the students to identify how your system can be improved. It's regularly looking at data. Our lunch detention, I told you, was broken last year. I could tell you that on any given day, we had 15% of our students who were assigned lunch detention actually there, and the root causes for why they weren't were varied and there's just many reasons they weren't there. We analyzed them and have found a way to improve it. So really important that you talk to people and you work on improving the systems once you have them in place. I don't know if we have time for it, but there was one more thing. Krissy, do we have time to talk about data calculations for just a moment?
Real quickly, I have a couple more slides I want to share.
No problem. So I only bring it up because when people have contacted me about attendance, one of the things they want to know is about my spreadsheet and how I keep track of all this. And I will tell you that right now I'm not aware of a specific program that will meet all your needs, particularly because if you pick your own standard and you pick your own interventions, that's typically not something that a canned program out there will do for you. So all I really wanted to say is don't be afraid to dig into the data yourself. And one thing that we did to support this is to open up a para to be able to crunch the data on every single day, because attendance changes every day. So my spreadsheet gets updated every single day, and I had to train the para, but she's doing a great job. And without that data, you really can't work on attendance in the way you need to, which is as soon as possible after the attendance the absence or tardy has happened.
Excellent. Well, James, I want to thank you so much. This has been such a great discussion with you, and I've learned a lot. Thank you for your time, and thanks for the great work.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
And we will certainly, if people have more questions for you, James, we'll make sure to connect the audience with you after the webinar.
Okay, great.
Let's skip that. We don't have time.
Okay. I wanted to briefly, just in the last couple of minutes, let everyone know, as Kefi mentioned, September is National Attendance Awareness Month, and OSPI is participating and supporting districts to participate by providing several different types of awareness materials. In particular, we've been working with DSHS and the Seattle Sounders. We have PSAs that highlight Henry Wingo from the Sounders. We have these wrap cards that are available to order on our OSPI attendance website. We have these posters and several other resources on the OSPI website. So please go take a look. And I wanted to just briefly highlight a couple of legislative and WAC changes before we sign off today. As you may have heard, there was an emergency rule that was filed recently that aligns our state definition of absence with the federal definition. We are in the public comment period right now. You can submit comments to me, and my email address is right there. And we have a public hearing on October 31st, Halloween at 1 p.m. here in Olympia. There's a bulletin that outlines these changes, and it is listed on the OSPI bulletin page. We also have a bulletin coming out that is posted on the OSPI website right now that highlights the changes to the attendance and truancy law. It was House Bill 1170 that was passed this last legislature. And a couple of highlights from that were that conferences are now required after 3 unexcused, not 2, and these are full day absences that the law refers to. And you may use other assessments. Previously, the requirement, and I should have spelled WARNS out in here, but the previous requirement was that the WARNS, which is the Washington Assessment of Risks and Needs of Students, is the only assessment that was to be used, and now you can use other assessments as well, and it is only required for middle school and high school students. And one thing we really want to highlight is that the law requires that each district identify a point of contact for chronic absenteeism and truancy, and you can submit that contact information through the truancy website and get us your contact information.
Okay. Next month, we're going to be looking at rethinking discipline, a systems approach to supporting positive behavior. That'll be October 11th from 10 to 11. So that's coming up. And we also wanted to ask you a couple of questions about what you think about our webinar and if there's anything we can do to improve. So if you want to email those comments to me, you can, or you can also add them into the questions box or the chat, either way, and we'll get to those. So what questions do you have that you want answered on GATE webinar series this year? What questions do you have for next month's topic? How can we make GATE better? So share your ideas with us. And for more information, we have so much great talent in the room. Of course, you can contact James if you would like to know more about what's going on at Sunnyside. You can also contact Krissy and Lori Shannon for attendance and truancy related questions. And if you want to know more about GATE, you can contact me. All of our slides are Creative Commons licensed, so yay for free license. Thank you so much for joining us, James. What a great show. We appreciate you coming on with us. And thank you, Krissy, too.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.